Back before phones and social media took over everything, we actually had to go outside as kids. Maybe it's just my area, but I barely ever see kids riding their bikes around or playing ding-dong ditch or doing any of those late-night mischievous kid activities anymore. But when I was younger, anywhere from like 9 to 17, I was constantly outside with my friends. Near my childhood house, there was a park down the street that a bunch of us used as a hangout spot, especially at night when our parents would get annoyed at us for being too loud. The park was perfect because 3 of its sides were bordered by a little patch of woods and the 4th side faced the road, and across from that side was another small strip of trees. So, basically, we didn't have any nearby houses spying on us or calling the cops over us making noise. This whole thing happened when I was about 13, that age when we rode our bikes literally everywhere every single day. I think the day this happened was a Saturday, and we'd gone to get pizza earlier before heading back to my friend Tony's place, which was close to mine. The 6 of us were hanging in his backyard until his mom came out yelling at him to quiet down, send us home, or go hang out somewhere else. By then, 3 of the guys decided to head home. Me, Tony, and our friend Rob chose to bike to the park instead of calling it a night. It was only around a 5-minute ride, and there was something super refreshing about biking at night. It felt easier and calmer. So the 3 of us got to the park. Other than the layout of the trees, the actual park had a small baseball field, a little bleacher, a couple of regular benches, and a pretty decent-sized playground with a swing set. We always chilled on the playground itself because it was this cool elevated hidden spot to hang around on. At some point while we were sitting on the playground, Tony suddenly went, "Shoo, did you hear that?" and we all stopped talking for a moment to listen. When nothing else happened, Tony said he thought he'd heard a footstep or some kind of thump on the playground that didn't come from us. Naturally, we all gave the area a quick look around and didn't spot anyone. But a few minutes later we all heard a sound this time, a kind of thud that came from somewhere on the playground structure. Now we were a bit unsettled because we were almost positive someone else was around making that noise. So we took another look, actually getting up and walking around, even calling out to ask who was there. Of course, no one answered. Eventually, we settled back down on the playground. We chilled for another few minutes until we heard another sound. This time it was way more unsettling. It was a voice, a child's voice, coming from inside the slide, one of those twisting metal slides you see at most playgrounds. I'm not going to lie, when we heard it, we all freaked out. Even though we had heard weird noises earlier, we hadn't heard anyone climbing into the slide, and those earlier thumps definitely didn't come from inside it. So I walked over to the slide and listened. I said, "Is someone in there?" and a voice answered, "Hello." It sounded like a little kid's voice, probably a boy, and like a toddler. I was 90% sure I heard, "Hello," and my friends heard it too. We all gave each other these terrified looks. We'd been there for half an hour and hadn't heard anyone get in the slide. I asked, "Do you need help?" But there was no reply. We didn't hear the voice again. I figured maybe a little kid was stuck in there, so I climbed in and slid down. The whole time I was expecting a child to appear around the curve, but when I got to the bottom, it was empty. I scanned the entire ground level of the playground and the area around it, and there wasn't a single person around. My friends were just as shocked as I was. There was literally no one besides us, and it wasn't possible for someone to run away that fast, especially a small kid. We checked every place someone could hide. Nothing. We were already freaked out, but when the same voice came from the slide again, this time saying, "Catch me," that was it, we sprinted to our bikes. We pedaled faster than we ever had, straight back to my house down the street. We regrouped and caught our breath in my backyard, trying to be quiet since my dad was probably sleeping and would get mad if he heard us. We talked in low voices about what happened and any possible explanations. But things only got creepier when someone knocked on the backyard gate. Yes, like an actual knock, as if asking to be let in. I said, "Who is that?" thinking it might be family, but an unfamiliar woman's voice answered. She said, "Hello," then asked, "Were you guys just at the park before?" We all looked at each other nervously. There was a tiny crack where the gate met the fence that you could peek through, so I looked, and saw a middle-aged woman standing there with this huge, eerie grin on her face, already staring right back through the crack like she knew exactly where to look. I stepped away because the sight was so disturbing. I said, "No, sorry." The woman replied, "Are you sure?" And Tony answered for me, "No, we weren't." She said, "Okay, thanks anyway." I moved back to the gate to see if she'd walked away, but she was still standing there, smiling and looking at me through the crack. We were so terrified that we immediately went inside through the back door. We hung out downstairs quietly for a while, totally shaken. That woman was terrifying, everything about her was wrong. My friends were too scared to go get their bikes, so they stayed over and left the next morning. We didn't go back to that park for a long time. If we really wanted to rationalize it, we could say there was a kid who wandered off from his mom and was playing in the park, and the mom was looking for him. But that doesn't make sense because we rode home too fast for anyone on foot to follow us. Also, we know for sure we didn't see any kid running around. So what did we hear in that slide? Who was that voice? Who was that woman? At this point, it's just a distant, unsolved memory we'll never get answers to. I never imagined that a simple walk through the park could turn into one of the most terrifying nights of my life, but somehow it did. I live in a small suburban town, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and most people assume it's safe to be out at any hour. It was a Friday night in the summer of 2018. I had just finished a late shift at work and wanted to clear my thoughts before heading home. The local park was only a few blocks from my apartment, and I used it often whenever I needed to walk or jog and think. That night, the park felt unusually quiet. The sun had gone down maybe an hour earlier, the streetlights were glowing across the pathways, but the trees still cast heavy shadows over the main trail. I remember feeling calm at first as I stepped inside, the smell of fresh-cut grass hanging in the air. I wasn't expecting to see anyone. Usually during weeknights I might encounter a couple of dog walkers or maybe some teens lingering on the benches. I had music playing at a low volume in my headphones as I headed down the main path. Everything seemed normal at first. I spotted a pair of dogs chasing each other in the distance and a few people strolling and laughing quietly. It felt peaceful, almost soothing. Then small things began to make me uneasy, though I tried to ignore them. The first thing was a man sitting on a bench near the path. He wore a hoodie with the hood pulled up even though it wasn't cold. He wasn't doing anything at all, just sitting and staring ahead. I didn't think much of it until I got closer and realized he was staring directly at me. He didn't flinch or shift his gaze when I passed. It made me uncomfortable, so I walked a bit faster, trying to convince myself he was harmless. I kept moving, trying to shake the weird feeling, but then I heard footsteps behind me. I paused, and they stopped. I waited several seconds, then kept moving, and the footsteps started again, matching my pace perfectly. My heart began to race, but I told myself it had to be someone else out for a walk. Still, the timing was too precise, too deliberate. I decided to change routes and cut through a smaller trail in the park that had fewer lights. The main path was still ahead, but the side trail looped back toward the street, and I figured I could get home quicker and maybe avoid whoever was behind me. As I turned onto the smaller trail, I realized the man from the bench had stood up and was now walking in the same direction. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, but something about the slow, steady way he moved made me freeze for a second. He wasn't jogging or strolling normally, he was moving in a way that seemed intentionally matched to me without directly looking. I took out my phone, checked the time, and pretended to make a call. He didn't react at all. It was like he didn't care that I was watching him. I forced myself to keep walking, trying not to panic. I figured that if I picked up my speed, maybe he'd stop following. I started jogging lightly, and he did the same, keeping the same distance. My mind went wild. Why was he following me? Was he dangerous? Should I double back toward the main path? I finally decided the best thing to do was get out of the park entirely. There was a street exit ahead that led to a well-lit neighborhood. I broke into a real run, my heart pounding like it would burst out of my chest. The footsteps behind me accelerated instantly, mimicking my pace exactly. I didn't look back, I just kept running. When I reached the street, I slowed and turned to look. The man had stopped at the edge of the trees, standing motionless in the shadows. I could just make out the hoodie, the shape of him, unmoving and watching. I don't know how long I stared before I finally turned and rushed home. My hands shook so badly I struggled to unlock my door. I thought it was over then. I kept telling myself he was probably just some weird guy who liked following people, maybe harmless. I tried coming up with rational reasons. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he was homeless. Maybe he just liked observing strangers. I tried to move on, but the night replayed in my head over and over. A few days later, I went back to the park during the day to convince myself everything was fine. I walked the same path, looking around for anything unusual. Everything appeared normal, and I started to relax until I reached the same bench where I'd first seen him. It was empty, but someone had carved something into the wood. I couldn't tell what it said. The lettering looked rushed, some of it smeared like whoever had done it didn't want it readable. I felt sick and quickly walked away after taking a picture. After that, I avoided the park at night entirely. But the worst part wasn't just feeling unsafe, it was the sense that someone knew I had been there, that someone might be waiting for me even when I wasn't looking. Soon I began noticing strange things around my neighborhood. Shadows shifting in the corners of my vision. A figure standing across the street that disappeared when I looked directly. A car parked down the block that I didn't recognize. Lights flicking on in homes when I walked by. I tried telling myself it was paranoia, but the memory of that night never faded. About 2 weeks later I went for an early evening jog, thinking it was safer than being out after dark. I stayed on the main streets and avoided the park completely. As I passed the park's edge, something froze me in my tracks. A figure stood just inside the tree line, barely visible. Same height, same build, same hood pulled up. I felt certain it was him. He didn't move, but I had this heavy, sickening feeling that he had been standing there for hours just watching. My instincts screamed for me to run, but instead I forced myself to back away slowly until I reached my car. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sped off, checking the rearview mirror over and over. I never saw him again in the park after that. But sometimes, walking through the neighborhood or near my apartment, I get that same sensation, like someone is watching me from just beyond where I can see. I've checked the park security footage before, but nothing ever shows up. No one entering at night, no one in the areas where I walked, even though the cameras are supposed to cover the whole place. I don't know if he knew how to avoid them or if he had been living somewhere hidden that no one noticed. The strangest part is that I never heard anything from him besides the footsteps. No words, no noises, just his presence. I told my friends and family, but most brushed it off as paranoia. I know what I felt, and I can't explain it. I avoid the park entirely after dark now, and even during the day I stay near the main roads. But the memory lingers. Sometimes late at night I catch myself staring toward the dark tree line where he once stood, wondering if he's still there waiting for someone else. I never went back, but some irrational part of me still believes he could be out there, just out of sight, watching anyone who walks alone. I never reported it because there was no real evidence, nothing to show except my own fear. I thought about calling the police, but how could I describe him? Just a hooded shape, silent and aware of everything I did. The uncertainty is the part that haunts me the most. I have no idea who he was, why he followed me, or whether he's still near. Even passing the park during the day makes my stomach tighten. Even now, years later, when I drive past, I sometimes think I see a figure standing in the trees. I can't tell if it's real or just my mind replaying things. I don't stop to check. I simply keep driving, hoping I never have to walk that path alone again. This happened less than 24 hours ago, and the details are still burned into my memory. I don't even know how to categorize what happened because the entire situation was so strange. It was the first time in my life I genuinely felt like I was in real danger. My group of 5 friends and I were hanging out at a well-known public park called the Overlook, named because it had a great view of the city and the nearby colleges. It was very late, around 11 p.m., and the plan was just to chill for a while. We had zero intention of doing anything besides sitting on the benches and talking. But one of my friends casually mentioned he had Roman candles in his trunk and suggested we light them. The Overlook is possibly the worst spot in the park to set off fireworks, so I told everyone we should head to a more hidden area known as the Loop. The Loop was only a few minutes away, surrounded by trees, and anyone outside that section of the park wouldn't be able to see us. The 6 of us split between 2 cars and drove over. Even though there was plenty of street parking inside the Loop, we decided to park outside on a nearby street just in case something happened. Then we walked toward the Loop's cul-de-sac, which was encircled by woods. The road leading into the Loop is long, twisting through dense forest, and the trees make it impossible to see what's inside from the outside. We noticed a few cars in random spots as we walked, but didn't think much of it since people go on late-night walks there all the time, though even then it felt strange for the hour. As we got deeper inside, we spotted several vehicles parked around the cul-de-sac with their lights off. Out of nowhere, a truck behind us started moving silently with its headlights still off. It had been facing the opposite direction toward the entrance, but it suddenly made a U-turn and headed toward us. We all felt uneasy and took cover behind some trees. The truck crept past us, circled the Loop, then drove back toward the entrance, abruptly stopped, and made another U-turn. All of us felt sick to our stomachs at that point. The truck was small, only big enough for maybe 3 people, yet there were 6 of us, each over 6 feet tall. Still, we all felt scared. For some reason, one of my friends thought it was a great moment to fire off a Roman candle, and sparks shot in our direction. Instantly, the truck flicked its headlights on and began creeping toward us. We ran deeper into the trees, down a sloping area, and hid behind more trunks, but the truck jumped the curb and drove through the grass straight toward where we'd gone. Whoever was behind the wheel must have spotted us because the high beams switched on and the driver laid on the horn. We bolted further into the woods. These weren't trails anybody used, there were thick bushes and tall grass everywhere, making it hard to move. About 20 feet in, we heard voices coming from the truck and noticed more headlights turning on in the Loop. While we were running, our group got separated. I was with 2 friends, and we had no idea where the others ended up, but that wasn't our main focus anymore. 2 men got out of the truck and started sprinting down into the woods with flashlights. The 3 of us dropped flat to the ground, trying to stay hidden. I managed to wedge myself under a big bush, but my friends weren't fully concealed. We were in a low part of the woods, directly below part of the Loop. After a few minutes of silence, we heard footsteps and saw flashlights sweeping the area from above. We couldn't tell if they could see us, but we knew we were stuck. There were men searching from both sides. We had no idea why they were reacting so violently to fireworks. We hadn't been anywhere near their vehicles, and fireworks are legal here. All we could do was pray they didn't find us. After around 15 minutes, the truck rolled out of the grass and back onto the street, then drove off. The other headlights vanished, but we never saw the guys who had chased us into the trees come back out. To make things worse, one of my friends realized he had dropped his phone somewhere during the chase. Finding it was surprisingly easy, but sneaking out of the woods and back toward the road was terrifying. It was pitch black and we couldn't risk using our phones or flashlights in case the men were still nearby. We eventually met up with another friend who had been hiding close. He told us one of the men had run right past him but hadn't noticed him, and he swore the man was carrying something that looked like a knife or a metal tool. Hearing that, we sprinted down the road toward the entrance. That's when we spotted the same truck from earlier sitting about 50 feet from the exit. Luckily there was a thick patch of woods off the side, and we slipped into it to move closer to the entrance. Somehow, the people in the truck realized we had moved because the high beams turned on again and the truck edged toward the tree line. We ran as fast as we possibly could. The truck followed alongside us on the road, but we cut sharply deeper into the woods. Eventually we reached the main road leading out of the loop, and the truck didn't pursue us beyond the entrance. We took 2 separate backstreets to get back to our cars, just to be sure no one was behind us. We didn't hear from the rest of our group until a couple hours later. They had escaped much faster by running non-stop instead of hiding. I will never step foot in the loop again. I have no idea what those people wanted or why they were so determined to track us through the woods, but whatever it wasn't anything good. The whole ordeal felt like it lasted forever, and I've never been more terrified. I honestly had no idea what was going to happen to us.